Draft season is almost over for most people. There's a few more drafts this week, but I know I'm done with most of mine. Nick's done with most of his. So we thought we'd talk about some of our draft regrets, our most commonly rostered players, and the games we're looking forward to in week one, plus a little Guillotine League talk as well. All coming up next on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Jeff Erickson. He's Nick Whalen. We are brought to you by some awesome, great sponsors, including FanDuel, of course, Verse Fantasy, and Underdog, who's going to be our lead sponsor for the next month or two. We'll be telling you more about that. We're going to be talking from some Guillotine Leagues as well. Very excited to do all that. Nick, let's jump right into it. You did your Beat Nick Whalen last week. We got to talk about that. I don't think I've seen your roster since then, so we'll talk about that. But how is your draft season going? Do you feel content? Do you feel itchy to get one more draft in so you can get another player that you haven't gotten so far?
I would say I feel fulfilled, with the number of drafts that I've done, especially over the last week or two. It feels like every single night, I got something going on. Obviously, continue to reel off a bunch of best balls as well. I have my final draft of the season coming up tonight. Actually, my home family league. So we're saving the best for last. That's one where, it's very Wisconsin based. So this is one where you almost need like a separate set of rankings because Romeo Dobbs will go in like round 4, and there's still a lingering Aaron Rodgers supporters out there that'll probably take him like 5 rounds early. So that's part of the fun though of these home leagues. We're so best ball brained, we're so high stakes league focused that it's a complete kind of crapshoot when you go into some of these home league drafts, and I enjoy it. Right there's more value on the board, but at the same time, I feel like with how optimized ADP and rankings are with a lot of these host sites, it's a little bit tougher than it was in years past to feel like you do get a big advantage over the field. But enjoyed doing my NFFC last week. Did the SiriusXM host league draft right after that on Thursday as well. Felt pretty good about both of those teams. But like you said, I mean, there's always going to be, even when you're doing 20, 30 drafts, including best balls, there's always going to be a handful of players that you kind of wish you had more exposure to. Yeah,
absolutely. And, it's funny you talk about the home league concept there, because I don't know if you do this, but I feel compelled to take the value that the league gives me sometimes, even though I don't necessarily want that player, wasn't planning on getting that player, but I think there's a couple ways you can value take, or you can make it your FOMO draft where, okay, I've wanted to get this player.
Right.
I'm going to go ahead and get him here. Why not? It turns out that's your best team. You're like, oh, I guess I've been drafting wrong the whole time. But
yeah,
I did one draft last week in person. I have like 4 home leagues. That's part of my problem is I have too many home leagues.
Too many homes.
Yeah, a lot of homes. Living the wealthy fantasy life here. But I got a Jahmyr Gibbs in the 3rd round. I'm like,
whoa,
okay, I guess I'll do it. Now it's a super flex league, so it's not it's not crazy, but it was funny. Like the first 4 picks were not quarterbacks in a super flex league. Is also, this is fun. I'm going to get a decent quarterback later. It's different, and it's not. And the thing is, it's not necessarily wrong. It's just different, and because you ultimately end up taking the same players. It's just the ordering's a little off.
Yeah, I did a home league draft a couple of weeks ago with some of my college buddies where I got Devon Achane, excuse me, at the end of the 3rd round. And I'm not really an Achane guy. If you've listened to me on this pod, if you've listened to me on SiriusXM, I'm healthily skeptical of Devon Achane at his, what I would call normal ADP. But if he's sitting there at the end of round 3, that risk becomes worth it. So you kind of have to have a different mindset, I think, going into some of those drafts. If you've been doing more high stakes, it's going to be kind of a completely different look at the player pool. But I do like your idea of, look, if you're in a home league draft, if it is relatively low stakes, if it's more bragging rights than, shooting for a $500,000 prize, I don't mind the idea of making that all right, here are the guys that I missed out on. This is the team where I want to make sure I get them. And I know each of us have, our list here of players that we wish we had drafted a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's often called the FOMO list, fear of missing out. In some cases I have none. In other cases I have just a little bit there, but let's go ahead and jump into some of those. because I think it's super important to kind of just realize, okay, well, let's know ourselves, know
Yep.
who's going to kill us this year. And for me, I'm definitely afraid that Bijan Robinson is going to be the 1.1 next year because I don't have any Bijan Robinson.
Yeah.
Every time I had a chance, I took Breece Hall over Bijan, or I took in the NFFC primetime draft on Saturday, I had the 3 pick. I took CeeDee Lamb. I think Bijan dropped to 7 in that draft. I don't have any Bijan.
Bijan would have been on my list, but I actually took him in round 1 of my NFFC with the 6th overall pick. I kind of went into that draft expecting Bijan to go somewhere between 3 and 5. And, it turned out that it went, CMC, Lamb, Hall, Tyreek Hill, and then Amon-Ra St. Brown at number 5. So I'm like, all right, well, I guess if Bijan Robinson's there, I'm going to take him. I was kind of anticipating going receiver there. So I had to adjust on the fly. But yeah, I get that. I mean, the evidence that Bijan Robinson could be the number 1 overall pick. Yeah, it's easy to lay out that case, but it feels like when you don't have that player on your roster, that is the chances by default. And, I kind of felt that way about Bijan. I felt that way about Breece Hall for a while. I was starting to get more Breece Hall later in draft season, but that's a good one for you. I have Garrett Wilson on my list as well. If you're looking at one player, and part of it is I haven't had that many drafts where I'm picking late in round 1. I feel like I'm always somewhere between 2 and 8, and I'm still more comfortable taking Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, even with some of the risks there. I would certainly consider, if I'm picking 9, taking Garrett Wilson over AJ Brown. I think that's totally defensible. But I do wish I had more Garrett Wilson. I think I only have him on 1 or 2 teams. And again, it's not avoiding Garrett Wilson. It's more just kind of how the draft board tends to break down depending on where you're picking in round 1.
Yeah, and with Garrett Wilson, I'm fully on board. It's weird. I'm in the same boat. I didn't draft from 10, 11, 12 that often. I put AJ Brown squarely at 9 for me, by the way. But then after that, 10, 11, 12, okay, am I gonna go with Wilson, or am I gonna go with the running back here? Am I gonna go with Taylor or Barkley? Next thing you know, Wilson's gone. But unlike you, I don't play a ton of best ball. Our sponsors at Underdog don't like hearing that. I play some. I dabble. But unlike you animals, like you and McKechnie and some of the others there, I don't know. See, you live a kidless life still so far, so that's part of it. A little more time to dabble on. Although I barely do. I have a
blaming your daughters for a lack of best ball drafts. Unbelievable.
It's terrible. I'm a horrible person for that there, but it really is kind of funny that I think I'd burn out if I did that, but some people, that's just, they're built that way, and that's great. But yeah, I think when you do 150 best ball leagues, you have everybody. If you have, I think I almost literally true. There's probably some that are square avoids, and that's great. Did you have do not fly lists on any players? Is there some players that you just don't want at all that you chose not to have?
Well, first of all, I'm not in 150 best balls. All right. I'm keeping this within reason. So I don't have exposure to any, or to every single player, but, in terms of early round guys, I wouldn't say I've, completely sworn off a single player, because, you're always going to hear the refrain that, every player at a certain point becomes a value. And, I kind of mentioned the HAN example earlier, but, I'm starting to get a lot less Tank Dell than I was earlier in the summer. Obviously, the Stephon Diggs trade being the main impetus there, but Tank Dell still went in the middle of round 3 in my NFFC. I think there's too good of a chance that Tank Dell ends up as the wide receiver 3 in Houston for me to take that chance. And even if he's the wide receiver 2, and you think Stephon Diggs is a close third, I don't see a ton of value there. And Michael Pittman's been another receiver who I've been avoiding for the most part. You look at the volume for Pittman last year, you look at kind of the relative lack of efficiency on that volume, the concerns over what that offense could look like in terms of fantasy, not necessarily real life, with Anthony Richardson taking over. I'm always going Devontae Smith, Rashee Rice, DK Metcalf over Michael Pittman. I'd happily now take Brandon Ayuk, of course, over Michael Pittman, given that we have that news. And even someone like Zay Flowers or T. Higgins, that's a debate for me. And I know, we don't necessarily love the offense per se for Zay Flowers. It's not, he's not going to be a 140 target type of receiver. T. Higgins, the clear number 2 in Cincinnati. I get that, but I just feel like there is a very defined ceiling for Michael Pittman. And, if he's your wide receiver 3, like in the NFFC draft that I did, somebody took him after already grabbing Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jalen Waddle, like that, I don't mind, but I don't love locking in Michael Pittman as my wide receiver 2. So he's about as close as it comes to somebody that I'm just really not interested in drafting.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm the same way. I'm the same way. Yeah, I yeah, if I had a little bit more volume, I think I might even have a better defined list of those. There's some
Mhm.
I just didn't end up with there, and then there's some I wanted to and didn't get there. We
Yep.
mentioned two of those there. I love the concept, and I'm going to put together my spreadsheet because first of all, I need to count how many like managed leagues I have.
Oh
I
yeah.
really need to know this because the part of the problem is the different the different platforms that we're on.
Yep.
And like, okay, the Fabs are on Tuesday here, Wednesday here, Thursday there. And when is it? Really need to set up my calendar well. When
Yep.
something breaks, when you have big breaking news, like, hey, where do I have this guy? I think that's important to know.
Oh, absolutely. And this would be a great time to shamelessly plug the My Leagues feature
Yes,
over on
correct.
RotoWire, where you can seamlessly, kind of sync your league up wherever
Mhm.
it's hosted using the My Leagues feature. It'll, import your rosters. It'll give you suggestions on lineups, suggestions on waiver claims. It's a really, really good way to manage your leagues. And I'm not just plugging this because it's on our website. I mean, it is one of
No,
the
it's
best
so true.
reviewed tools that we've ever come out with over at RotoWire. So if you're a subscriber or you want to go check it out, rotowire.com/try. Highly, highly advise playing, or if you are playing in, I would say at least 3+ leagues. I mean, it helps manage those, so much easier than putting together a spreadsheet or trying to bookmark every single league and you got a million tabs open when you're
It's
doing
like you're
waivers.
looking at my browsers right now, dude. My browser windows right now. Not my
Look, I can't
browsers.
see your screen.
Sound older,
I'm not
Jeff.
going to speak for what's on your screen, but I know there's probably a lot of tabs open, and My Leagues would help that.
Yes.
You mentioned other guys that these are players that I wish I had drafted more, not guys that I'm not drafting. It's
Mhm.
just a list of players that I put together who I wanted to draft, and for whatever reason, ended up with them only on a handful of teams. Derrick Henry is one for me. Again, a lot of that came down to where I was drafting. You often see Derrick Henry go at the end of round two. I'm somebody that tends to be picking in the middle to the front half of round two in a lot of leagues. If he's there in round three, that's really where I've been able to snap him up. But I don't have as much Derrick Henry as I would like. I don't have as much Sam LaPorta as I would like it. And part of that is, I really continue to shop in that mid tier of tight ends, Evan Ingram, George Kittle, Jake Ferguson, guys like that. I have a ton of all those three. I just haven't been buying in necessarily on the early tight ends, but I do think there's a very realistic world in which Sam LaPorta is the clear tight end one this season, given what's going on in the receiving
Mhm.
core for Detroit.
Yeah.
Diontae Johnson is on my list, and then Brian Thomas, who I started to get a little bit more of later in draft season, but those are two receivers who, like Diontae Johnson, I just early in draft season, I'm like, playing for the Panthers, this team was just just a general malaise, on offense last year. They're so non-exciting, but I think we see Adam Thielen take a step back this season. I mean, he's like 33 years old. I think there's a pretty realistic chance that even if Bryce Young doesn't turn into the player that we thought he could be coming out of Alabama, that he will be markedly better this season. They've invested in that offensive line. I think Diontae Johnson could be the, bad team, good fantasy stats guy this year. And his ADP is rising to start to reflect that.
Yeah. And it also kind of is like sometimes that in that case, when by the time he goes, I have 4 wide receivers already.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
part of
that's
it.
the other part of me that's a little bit yeah, that has me reticent there.
Yeah.
So it's a tough call. Isaac says he has a little FOMO from not getting Blake Corum. That's one of my guys that
Yeah.
I missed out on a lot.
Uh,
He's trying to get and he's getting trade offers for it there. Someone, he's getting like someone offered LaPorta and Wright for Kittle and Corum. I wouldn't do it. I would just stick with LaPorta and Wright. I think as much as I like the idea of Blake Corum and how he could possibly take over, he's not the starter right now. And I think we need to
yeah.
make sure we don't elevate him too much there. And I think that's even though I don't often draft LaPorta,
Mhm.
I wouldn't do that there. So I'd hold on there. I understand you have Kyrum and not Corum. It's tough, but don't let someone hold you over a barrel for him either. That's
Yeah.
just my advice.
I actually think that's a reasonable deal. I don't think that's an instant no for me. I would at least think
Okay.
about it, partially because I'm pretty high on George Kittle. I think there's a world in which the gap between LaPorta and Kittle isn't massive. But I also just said, there's a world in which LaPorta is the clear tight end one. So if it depends on your evaluation of LaPorta first and foremost. But you are right on Corum, and I'm pretty happy with the amount of Corum that I have. There's a reason he's not on my list. I was sniped on him. I 100% planned on taking him in round 10 of my NFFC. Had him in the queue, ready to click. Went one pick before me, ended up having to pivot to a receiver in Dontavian Wicks. But it is a strange situation, right? In that it does feel like increasingly the entire fantasy community is just assuming that, Kyren Williams is on the clock. And by like week 4, he's going to be like off this team and it's just 100% Blake Corum. I think Blake Corum certainly has a role. I think he'll have a role right away. barring an injury to Kyren Williams, I don't think they're just, handing this backfield over to Blake Corum at some point. I think it could be a frustrating timeshare. And certainly if you're on one side or the other of that, I'd rather it be the guy who I took in the 10th round in Blake Corum than, having to worry about my second round picks workload in Kyren Williams. So I've not been getting a lot of Kyren. I've just kind of been, going full Pontius Pilate and washing my hands of that situation. If I'm going to take one, it's going to be Corum, but I'm not operating under the assumption that he's just going to completely, steal this workload away from Kyren Williams. I don't think that's really the Rams' plan. And it just feels like everybody's treating this like a ticking time bomb. And maybe it is, but I don't think Kyren Williams returning punts, which by the way, he did for part of last season. He did in college. I don't think that's this like official death knell on his fantasy value.
Yeah, I think we all reacted to that, but yeah, I agreed. One guy I have on my list of not drafting enough is your guy, Trevor Lawrence. You guys feel that Trevor Lawrence was having a solid bounce back season? John Rob Wright asked that. I do. I actually do think he's going to be pretty good. He's not getting drafted as a fantasy starter, which is beautiful. The concern for me is the play calling, and there's a little of Trevor himself in there. I mean, he earned some of that. I also think he was on course for a pretty decent season, not amazing season, but pretty good until he got hurt, and then tried to play through multiple injuries at the end of the season. So I wish I had a little bit more. I wish I have some Brian Thomas Jr., although like you said, the price did get high on him later on. I don't have any Gabe Davis. No, I have some Christian Kirk, and it was always like, okay. Like I got Kirk in an auction, and I'm like, oh, okay, great. I'm not like fist bump. At the same time, I probably got a pretty decent price on him. So yeah, I just think that, but I kind of wish I had a little bit more.
Yeah, I think, we started to see over the final couple preseason games, and it was, glimpses, right? We're talking like 2 total catches from Brian Thomas. So you don't want to overreact, but I think if you're looking for that receiver who, goes later in a draft, who's, widely available, in round 7, 8, 9, wherever it is, depending on your league host. If you're looking for that guy who could finish as I'm not saying he's going to be a first round value by any means. I don't see a Justin Jefferson rookie year type of production coming from Brian Thomas. But if you're looking for somebody who could jump up a few rounds in terms of where he ultimately finishes, I think he has to be on that list. We've seen Gabe Davis, this is like 3 straight years of like, all right, maybe this is the year that Gabe Davis finally becomes more consistent. I'm just not all that optimistic. I think they'll try to use him a little bit differently than they did in Buffalo, but I don't see Gabe Davis, being the definitive wide receiver 2 for the Jags. I think Christian Kirk is still that wide receiver 1, but obviously he operates mostly in the slot. And I think there's a big opportunity for Brian Thomas to, even early in the season, cement himself as that number 2 option in that receiving core and really jump ahead of Gabe Davis. And obviously the ADP reflects that. I think the general talent gap between those two, as much as I respect Gabe Davis as a deep ball guy, he's just not the complete type of receiver that Brian Thomas could be. To go back to your Lawrence point, by the way, I have plenty of Trevor Lawrence as my QB 2, right? I love, kind of shopping in that range. And, if I take, Brock Purdy, for instance, which I did in the Sirius XM host league, partially because I had taken a few 49ers early in the draft, I'm going to circle back a couple rounds later and, grab Tua or grab Trevor Lawrence or grab Kirk Cousins or grab Matthew Stafford. I mean, it did feel like Lawrence had a down season last year. He still finished as QB 12, QB 13, I think, according to fantasy points. He's going as the QB 16 right now. Yeah. And, you look at the injury did change things for him. He was actually a better fantasy quarterback down the stretch, even despite kind of limping his way through those final 6 or 7 games. I mean, he was the QB 7 after week 11 last season. So I do think there is a gap here. If you're expecting any sort of breakout from Trevor Lawrence, even just a step forward, if you don't want to go all the way to a quote unquote breakout, he's being drafted lower than he was last season. Right. And part of that is you have, 2 more quarterbacks in the mix in Jayden Daniels and Caleb Williams, who both go ahead of him. But, I'm not saying Trevor Lawrence is going to finish as the QB 5, but could he finish as the QB 7, 8, maybe even 6? Yeah, I think that's in the cards. So, you're basically getting Trevor Lawrence for free as your second quarterback.
Yeah, you are. I got a couple more regrets, but we got to share some notes from our friend at Underdog. We're proud to partner with Underdog Fantasy for the NFL season. Underdog is the easiest place to play fantasy sports. It's also the fastest growing fantasy app in the industry. In addition to their popular best ball contests, Underdog also offers great DFS pick'em games. Pick whether your favorite players will have a higher or lower stat total in this week's game for a chance to win big. You can win up to 1,000 times your money in a single night by picking between 2 and 8 players to build a pick'em entry. I know Nick, you've been spending a lot of time on Underdog. We do this. We talk about it in hoop season too, not just football. Even baseball. I did some fun Underdog contests early in baseball season as well. I like doing the higher, lower stat projections and all that. It's some fun stuff there to use. So jump in on that. You can sign up with at RWNFL to claim your free pick and a first-time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store. And don't forget to register with my promo code RWNFL to claim your free pick plus a first-time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Must be 18 or older, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, 19 plus in Alabama and New England. And play and present in a state, or Nebraska, not New England. Come on. And present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. They always apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP, 1-800-639-8783, or text next-step to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE New York or text HOPE New York. That's 467-369. Thanks to Underdog for being our title sponsor. We will be referring to them copiously throughout our podcast the next couple of months there. All right, Nick, other draft regret for me. I didn't get top end tight ends or quarterbacks a whole lot. I think Patrick Mahomes is going to go crazy this year. I think that I really kind of regret not getting a whole lot of him. At most I have like one share of him. And I think what the Chiefs did, to try to build around him this year is really going to work out pretty well. We know he's got that in him. We just last year, everyone got burned by him. So I think people are kind of shying away. I kind of avoided early quarterbacks, but I really fear that like that 5,000 season separation seasons within him.
Yeah, I've had that same sneaking suspicion as well. And as you know, I typically am not an early quarterback guy. But we're 2 years removed from Patrick Mahomes, putting up 25 plus fantasy points per game in 2022. I mean, that's a full point plus what Josh Allen averaged last season, right? Which felt like an all-time quarterback season. So we know what Mahomes is capable of, even without the immense rushing upside that someone like Josh Allen presents, right? I mean, 14 rushing touchdowns for Josh Allen last year. I think there's probably some regression there. I've stayed away from early quarterbacks for the most part. I actually did take Lamar Jackson in my NFFC in round 5. It was more of a best player available equation than anything else. And I was, long story short, I was a little bit light on receiver because I started running back, which I didn't love. But again, it was a value play and, felt like I needed to make that up at another position. So I wanted that advantage at quarterback. If I am going early quarterback, Jeff, it's been Lamar and it's been Jalen Hurts more often than not, just because of that rushing upside. And, obviously Mahomes has proven that, he can have one of those 5,000 yard, 50 touchdown seasons like that. That is well within the realm of possibility. It's something he's done before. So I don't really have a problem with the ceiling argument for him. But, as of right now in the NFFC, he's going like a round and a half ahead of Lamar Jackson. So there's still kind of are you drafting him at his ceiling equation with Patrick Mahomes? You're not getting a discount based on last season, right? People aren't looking at this and saying, Mahomes wasn't that good last year. Now he's all of a sudden the QB6 or QB7. Like he's a QB2, right? So I think there's value to be had there, but at the same time, there's only one spot he can move up, in terms of the quarterback rankings on the season. So I always talk about, trying to find value and, someone like Trevor Lawrence, someone like Jared Goff, these guys who are QB 15, 16, 17, but could finish as the QB 8, 9, 10. I would rather be in that range. I would rather, load up on running backs, maybe load up on receivers, take my first running back in round 3, rather than burn that late 3rd round pick on Patrick Mahomes. But I see the argument, right? When he comes out and it's week 3 and he throws for 440 yards and 5 touchdowns, you're going to regret not having him.
Yeah. It will be like, how did we ignore all the deep threats he got added? Now it kind of helps like Brown's hurt right now, is going to miss the week.
Officially out for week 1, by the way.
Yeah. Yep. So that's part of it there. But the way I've been drafting, I don't have any Allen, I don't have any Mahomes, I don't have a Lamar, maybe one Lamar. I have like Hurts in the fishbowl, but that's a super flex. So super flex leagues are different, but I just in single quarterback leagues, I don't have those premium quarterbacks. I kind of regret a little not having Lamar either. I think he could go crazy in year 2 of this the Monken offense here.
Yeah, well, part of my regret on not having more Derrick Henry is, I do think they now, they have that goal line back, right? So there
Yep.
is an argument that, Lamar Jackson, despite, these reports that he slimmed down and, felt like he was playing at, a weight that was uncomfortable these last couple of years. You do wonder what the touchdown upside is for him, right? I mean, he's not Jalen Hurts. He's not somebody that is just kind of automatic on the 1 yard line like Hurts is. And I think the addition of Derrick Henry certainly does give you some pause. So obviously, the rushing yardage is going to be there for Lamar. The rushing usage is going to be there, but I still think there's a little bit more touchdown potential if you're looking at that specific category with Hurts versus Lamar. And there's a reason that he's going 9 or 10 picks ahead of him. But again, if you are not going to take Josh Allen, Mahomes, Hurts, or Lamar, I'm not taking CJ Stroud. That is somebody who I don't really have any regrets about. I don't really get the value equation there. And I know he goes like 2 rounds after Allen and Mahomes, but that's somebody who we kind of need to see it, right? We need to see the 50 touchdown, 4,800 yard season from CJ Stroud before I'm willing to buy in. And for a guy who has just so limited rushing upside, that's one where I don't like the early quarterback. There are too many good players available, with pick 52 or whatever it might be in your draft to burn that spot on a quarterback. Like I really don't think there's a huge difference between CJ Stroud and Jordan Love, who goes 2 rounds later, or the upside of Dak Prescott, who goes almost 3 rounds later.
Yeah. Exactly right. I hear you on that. And I think, I've been ending up, I got Stroud in a couple places, one of which was a super flex league, another one where he was like the QB8. And I'm like, okay, well, in that case, I'll take him.
That's fine.
But yeah, QB5, I get it. Especially at, if it's going commensurate, like 5th round, then I'm not going to be doing it there. I think, Love 3 rounds later is fine. Dak 3 rounds later is fine. And Burrow, even I get in some cases there at that price point too. Let's talk some Guillotine Leagues. Guillotine Leagues are fun. I'm going to probably jump into one here. That I kind of have FOMO about getting into Guillotine Leagues. So the beauty of them is, if you get a dog of a team and you get eliminated, well, okay, you're done. But here's how it works. It's like traditional fantasy football with a few twists. You set up and draft your team just like a normal league. Each week, though, the lowest scoring team gets knocked out. It's brutal, but it's a way just to you kind of avoid you avoid the hammer, you avoid the knife. Next thing you know, you're picking up all these guys off the wire that from the dead teams there. And as long as you can avoid being last, it's nice. All the players from that eliminated team become free agents each week. You get a weekly fab bidding war for those sweet players, and you'll get the 1.1. A lot of times, McCaffrey will be out there in many cases there. And it's crazy. You survive the chop, be crowned champion. It's a survivor style format. So that also means you can start any week. If you're really feeling left out, start a Guillotine League in week 2. You don't have to have this, you can have a varying number of players. It can be an odd number of teams, by the way. That's one of the things that's kind of handy about that. We're sponsored by the folks at guillotineleagues.com. You can do private and public leagues. So if you don't have a group of people that want to do it, just join a public one there. You can still do it there and survive the chop. Some tips on Guillotine Leagues. And we had a good article on the site. Our guy Steve Belanda wrote an article about that. All sorts of good tips. I think the big one I always think of is be safe. This is not the league to go take Marvin Harrison at the end of the first round. Not the league to kind of take those upside swings, especially because guess what? They're going to be out there on the waiver wire for you there. Yes, at the end of the year, you want to have like the best player at every position. Early on, you want to just have good players and survive.
Yeah, it's really a completely different mindset from most fantasy leagues that you play in. I mean, it's you don't care if you have the second fewest points in any given week. It's all about creating that floor. It doesn't matter if you put up 250 points and the second to last place team puts up 70 points. It all works the same, right? It's all about surviving that next week. So I think there are a lot of somewhat obvious things that you need to keep in mind. Like you said, drafting for safety. Not taking someone like Marvin Harrison with the 11th pick in your draft. Just eat the chalk and take AJ Brown or take Chris Olave or whoever it is. You can still speculate as the draft goes along. I'm not saying you can't, take someone like Ladd McConkey or Brock Bowers late, but maybe you want the security of someone like Jake Ferguson or David Njoku, whoever that might be. I think the tight end position in general is an interesting one because obviously there aren't that many that you feel great about. And I think it makes sense to invest in one of those top 7 or 8 tight ends just to have some security there. And as long as you're able to survive, you might be able to upgrade that position as the year goes along. The other thing to keep in mind is, again, this is week to week, right? So you're not speculating on Jonathan Brooks. You're probably not even taking Hollywood Brown, who could only miss 1 week, but still, you might need whatever those points are in week 1. So it's not really a stash type of league, right? You're not really worried about, all right, well, I'm going to get this guy in week 7. He's going to explode after that. You might not make it to week 7, right? So you got to do everything you can to bolster that roster early in the season. And part of that, I think, is keep an eye on the early season schedule, right? We don't have any bye weeks the first couple of weeks of the year, but you don't want to end up, stacking a bunch of players from the Detroit Lions or the Tennessee Titans or the Philadelphia Eagles who have a week 5 bye, right? If you have Jalen Hurts, Dallas Goedert, and AJ Brown, you're going to be in trouble come week 5 because you're not going to have those guys available and you might not survive that week. So I would say veer away from stacking in general in this league, and especially stacking early in the year when it's, even more about survival. And as the year goes along and fewer teams are in the league, maybe you could get away with it. You start to add other players to your roster to give you that insurance. But, early on, you're not going to have this bevy of free agents every single week and, sitting out there. You're going to, as the season progresses, you'll have fewer teams bidding on that crop of free agents. And that's where you can really, really start to stack those teams. But yeah, stay away from the early bye weeks. Yeah, that would be my word of advice.
Yeah. The other thing is I would do a lot of my drafts are anchor running back, right? One early running back and then fill everything else. I think here I might be more inclined to do 2 running backs earlier, a little bit more robust, not quite robust running back. I'm not going to go running back, but same time, one of the underpinnings on anchor running back or zero, especially zero running back, is players are going to emerge. Well, guess what? You don't have time to wait for them to emerge. You need to, you don't want to kind of go through a stinky week 1 and never get there. So yeah, that's another reason why I think it's important to kind of have a little bit more balance to it there. The other thing I think is interesting about Guillotine Leagues, and then we'll move on, is the waiver wire strategy, the fab strategy. Do you go all at, say McCaffrey's team gets knocked out, is the low man team, and he's not hurt. There's nothing about that. It's just he ran up against the Jets in week 1, didn't do much. The team didn't do his manager, didn't do as well, do well to fill out the other spots. McCaffrey's available in week 1. Do you blow your fab to get McCaffrey, use like 95% of your fab because that's what probably will take to get him? Or do you kind of save it for different portions of the season? It's an interesting philosophical question because you're getting the best player and you get him for the entire season too, if you can last that long. But do you want to be able to control the board later on in the season is the question.
Yeah, that's the thing. And this is where it kind of reminds me of like a survivor pool in some ways, especially, Circus Survivor, where you're thinking about saving teams for later in the year. And it's like, well, I want to make sure I have, Kansas City available for Christmas week 17. And it's like, well, I also got to make sure I make it to week 17 to even have that debate. So I think that would be the parallel that I draw there. For someone like McCaffrey, I'm willing to empty the chamber, right? If he's not injured, if whatever team he's on loses in week 1, I'm fine grabbing Christian McCaffrey. I think there's a short list of players, essentially any first round player, right? If CeeDee Lamb's team gets knocked out, if Jamar Chase's team gets knocked out, Tyreek Hill, Bijan Robinson, like those are guys that are such game changers that I just want them on my roster as soon as possible. But, I think it could be appealing if, I don't know, let's say Kenneth Walker's team gets knocked out. I'm not blowing 30% of my fab budget to add Kenneth Walker, right? I think there's a defined difference between some of those elite guys who can, in a lot of ways, almost like single-handedly win you certain weeks versus just a nice depth add or, an RB2, right? So I think it totally depends on the player. There's going to be at least one first-round player who will get knocked out in week 1. Yep. Obviously, you want to make sure you're not overbidding, don't just max it out right away because you're going to regret it later in the season. But really, it's only a handful, 8 or 9 guys who I would consider, going above, 25% of my fab budget early on, because you're going to be in dollar days pretty quickly if you start bidding on these kind of mid-tier players.
Yeah. And of course, platform matters in terms of like how you're able to allow to add players. Can you have $0 bids? Can you do waivers after the fab run? Because when there's only 3 teams left, okay, well, you can still add almost anybody still if you need it there. If you're interested, we're doing a promotion with the guillotineleagues.com. Here, I'm posting the link in the chat. You guys can check it out for yourselves. I highly recommend it. Guillotine Leagues are a blast, and we're affiliating with guillotineleagues.com. In fact, part of the URL is affiliate equals RotoWire. So check that out. And hopefully you enjoy it. Let us know because it's super fun. So check it out when you get an opportunity there. But guillotineleagues.com. And that's our talk about that. We're going to talk about week 1 and who we're excited to see. But first, quick notes from our friends at Verse Fantasy and FanDuel. First, from Verse Fantasy, why wait all season to win in fantasy? With Verse Fantasy, you can cash in every week. Download the Verse app, sync your fantasy league, and start wagering and winning today. Verse Fantasy is the new way to play fantasy. There's no need to draft a new team or bring your league to a new platform. Simply sync your current league from ESPN, Sleeper, or Yahoo into the Verse Fantasy app and instantly get money lines and spreads for your league's matchups that week. Playing fantasy for fun is cool, but playing for real money is the future. Play for real money on your own underdog lines and then place contest entries between primetime games to bet on your own comeback. Verse will even show you your odds for winning the title or being crowned the Sacco, every player's nightmare. Enter the arena this season with Verse Fantasy and use promo code ROTO, that's ROTO, to get a 100% deposit match up to $50 when you sign up. We're also joined this week by our friends at FanDuel. NFL kickoff is here, and FanDuel is giving away a special new user offer to RotoWire fans. Sign up and bet $5 on any FanDuel market and receive $200 in bonus bets, plus 3 free weeks of NFL Sunday Ticket. Visit sportsbook.fanduel.com or download FanDuel Sportsbook in the App Store today to claim this offer. All right, so they're offering you Sunday Ticket as part of that there. That kind of perfectly leads into our next topic, Nick, and that is which games are we most excited to see? It's and that's one of the there's so many on the plate here. I think it's interesting. Like you play in the NFFC, you get the free look those first 2 games because there's drafts on Saturday. There's, as my colleague Scott Jenstad pointed out, we got 4 premium teams in the free look. We've got the Ravens and the Chiefs, and then we got the Packers and the Eagles. I think so many key fantasy players, key fantasy teams, we get that free look on there. And I'm super excited about both those games.
Got to be honest, I totally forgot about the free look, but this is fantastic as somebody who is rostering Saquon Barkley, Lamar Jackson, Jayden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, even Rashad Bateman in my NFFC draft. So that is a good point. If you are playing in the NFFC, you kind of get to essentially choose if you want to keep those scores or throw them back after the primetime games on Thursday and Friday. I, of course, Jeff, want to watch every single game, as much of every game as I possibly can this weekend. We got the TVs fired up. They're fully gassed up. They're ready to go when we hit noon on Sunday here in Wisconsin. But honestly, this is a great week 1. I've seen some some pushback actually to the Thursday and Friday matchups, making Baltimore go to Kansas City in week 1. That's not fair. And, Green Bay and Philadelphia, all of a sudden we got games on a Friday night. Like, who would complain about this? This is fantastic. I mean, this is almost more of the college football week 0 style, right? Where you have the kind of the national kickoff game. And I mean, Baltimore, Kansas City, it's about as good of a matchup as you could ask to kick off the season. Green Bay and Philly should be an extremely fun game on Friday night. So I think those are both free spaces. If you're talking about which games you're looking forward to, everybody's going to be watching those. They're standalone games. They're 4 of what might be, I don't know, the 8 best teams in the NFL this season. So obviously we're looking forward to those, but if you're looking for some kind of sneakier candidates, Tennessee, Chicago to me stands out. And that is one that I feel like will not necessarily get the primetime slot. When you look at the national coverage map over at 506maps.com, you'll see all right, just very small pockets of the country are getting this game. But I have a lot of curiosity about Tennessee. What does this team look like? Everybody kind of assumes they're a distant 4th in the AFC South. I don't think Tennessee operated that way this offseason. The way they went out and shopped the veterans at skill positions. They replaced Derrick Henry with Tony Pollard. We get year 2 of Will Levis, and he actually goes into this year knowing that he's the starter. I think I have a lot of curiosity about what that offense will look like. And then, Chicago's self-explanatory, right? I mean, Caleb Williams is walking into a tailor-made situation for a number 1 overall quarterback. He's going to be extremely fun to watch. I'm excited to see him with Rome Odunze, with DJ Moore. We'll see how overweight Keenan Allen truly is, Jeff. That's one that a lot of people I don't think will have circled, but outside of the obvious, the Caleb Williams curiosity, I think that could be a really fun game.
I think there's so much buzz in Chicago for that game. I think it is actually going to be sneaky in terms of that. So we'll see about that, but it is pretty wild there to see how that's going to happen. I'm excited about another one there. Rematch between the good grief. Go to ESPN.com. I got some sort of ad that follows for it. I was just looking at the schedule. Sorry.
I assume you're going to say Carolina, New Orleans.
Yes, of course, as one would always say, but no. I'm excited about the Sunday night game.
Oh, yeah.
Rams and the Lions. It is a playoff rematch. When we, remember going into that game, there was a lot of buzz that the Rams are, even though they were on the road, were the better team than the Lions. There was a lot of people all over the Rams. I know, playoff
myself
drafts
included.
Yeah. And the Lions had to rally in that one there. They took care of business. And now everybody's talking about the Lions as a sneaky Super Bowl contender this year. No one's really saying that about the Rams. I'm kind of curious. And the fact that it's in Detroit actually probably helps the Lions quite a bit. I do think they have a legit real home field advantage. I think that's part of it.
Yeah, no question. I mean, we saw Detroit in a primetime slot last year get off on the right foot at Kansas City. No Chris Jones, no Travis Kelce. That certainly helped. But nonetheless, I think that was kind of the official. All right, we have emerged from fun young team that a lot of people seem to like as kind of their secondary team that they root for to legitimate Super Bowl contender. And obviously that played out as the season went along. I kind of like the Rams in this spot to at least cover, Jeff. I mean, Detroit right now is a 3.5 point favorite. According to ESPN bet. I think we get another really close game, much like we saw in the postseason. I think Detroit is the team that, has more carryover, I guess, from last season as far as, I think this is just kind of a well-oiled machine. I think they're going to pick up where they left off. We have a few more questions about the Rams, but obviously, they're telling us Puka Nacua is going to be healthy. Cooper Kupp is healthy for the time being. And I think that offense has a really good chance to hit the ground running as well. We have questions about the offensive line. I think they will be tested right away by a very good Detroit defense. And, we're going to see, how do you replace Aaron Donald? We're going to get our answer because this Detroit team is going to do everything they can with that offensive line to run the ball down the Rams' throat. And, guys like Braden Fisk and Jared Verse, they're rookies out of Florida State. They're going to be tested right away. They have some other injuries along that defensive line. I'm very high on what the Rams can be long-term throughout this season. They need to stay healthy. This roster is very much top-heavy. They have question marks in the trenches on both sides. That's not always a great recipe. But if they can get healthy and stay healthy on the offensive line specifically, I think this is a team that, honestly could push the 49ers to win that division. I think they do have that kind of upside in a best case scenario.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's a fascinating game, and it's the primetime game too. So of course we're going to be paying a lot of close attention to that. We got a huge divisional matchup. We got the Texans at the Colts. I mean, this is a massive game for the AFC South. Both teams have aspirations to win the division. Houston's obviously the favorite. In fact, they're a road favorite in this game, which I kind of found surprising. I did my guess the lines thing before I went on VSiN last week there. And, yes, the lines have been around, and in many cases they've been talked about. But Houston's a 2.5 point road favorite. And, the total in this game is 49.5. So the bookmakers are thinking this is going to be a ticket to the carnival.
Houston's the only road favorite right now in week 1, and I don't really see that changing. No, excuse me. Minnesota also. Yeah, Minnesota also a slight road
How dare
favorite.
You overlook that?
Yeah, my goodness. That one's not on the list.
The Titans there.
Yeah, Mike, that one might be the lowest of the low. But yeah, so Minnesota and Houston are the only two road favorites. Hard to argue against that. I think Houston's a deserved road favorite. The total to me, I think you're relying more on the Houston side of things for that. Not that Indianapolis can't be explosive, but I think this could be a more ground-based attack, not necessarily a quick strike offense for the Colts. And I think we have some reservations based on the last time we saw Anthony Richardson in the preseason. Some good, some bad, but I don't think he's exactly steamrolling into the season with as much momentum as he had a month ago. But I'm more curious to see the Houston side of things. We got our glimpses of Anthony Richardson last season. Obviously, we hope he stays healthy and we get to see more of that. But, can Houston come out and look like the offense we think they can be right away? Is this going to be one of those passing attacks where you just feel helpless as a defense? Because, this is about as good of a 1-2-3 receiving core as we've seen in recent memory. You still have a passable tight end in Dalton Schultz. Obviously, you bring in a veteran running back in Joe Mixon. I think this is a potential statement type of game for the Houston Texans to announce that, they are kind of taking that next step that we talked about with the Detroit Lions, right? Houston was fun, young team last year. You kind of wondered what the ultimate upside was. The Ravens showed us that in the divisional round of the playoffs. But I think if Houston comes out and, smashes the Colts and puts up 35 on the road, I mean, that's going to end up being one of the biggest takeaways from week 1.
I think people are really kind of projecting. I don't know. I think Houston's gonna be really good. I love how they realized they hit on Stroud, they built around him. I like all that, and yet I don't know. I feel like there's like a premature crowning going on. I think the Colts are actually pretty good. I don't know. We'll see about that. You were talking earlier how Stroud might be overdrafted a little bit, for instance, there.
Yeah, well, I think there's just a disconnect between where he's going in fantasy drafts versus the upside. It's like I like CJ Stroud a lot more in real life than I do at his fantasy ADP.
Yeah.
It's not anything against CJ Stroud. It's a math equation of like how many yards and how many touchdowns does this guy have to throw for to make up for the lack of rushing,
Yeah.
And in real life that doesn't matter as much.
Yeah. One other game I wanted to talk about, and then we'll take our we got a couple of starred questions we're going to hit up here at the end as well. But this is the kind of like uncertain game of two presumably very good teams in the Browns and the Cowboys. What is Deshaun Watson going to look like? We haven't seen him this year. We didn't play. Granted, the preseason we always talk about it being overrated, but coming with a guy coming off an injury, I think we all kind of wanted to see him a little bit more.
I guess, yeah. I mean, where I stand on Watson. My hopes are pretty low, pretty tempered for what he could be. But we're now going into another year where we're kind of going through the same motions of, all right, can he get back to the player that he was? We'll see. We'll see, man. I mean, this actually should be a really fun game, though. I'm glad you highlighted this one. It's probably the best game in the late window where we have Vegas and the Chargers, we got Denver, Seattle, Dallas, Cleveland, and then Washington, Tampa Bay. Will actually be a lot of fun, I think, for Jayden Daniels' curiosity purposes. I mean, I'm not that excited about the Tampa Bay side of things, but Dallas, Cleveland, I'm already going through, and I'm in a confidence points pick'em league where it's just you pick a straight up winner, rank them 1 through 16. This was one of the toughest games to evaluate. I mean, you could totally see this going either way, right? I mean, Cleveland 2.5 point home favorite. I mean, the implication is that this would essentially be a pick'em at a neutral site. I think we saw Dallas run like a 2.5 man offense last year and had relative success doing that with Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and Jake Ferguson. They didn't really bolster that offense enough to make me feel differently about it. They didn't really address the offensive line in the ways that you would like. Cleveland to me is the better overall team. It just comes down to, can you get better than, borderline average quarterback play from Deshaun Watson? I mean, I think if this Cleveland defense picks up where it did last season, this should be a game that they're able to win at home. And I think the total being 42.5 says a lot. I mean, they're not expecting Dallas to come out and, put up 30 as they were routinely doing last season. That's not going to happen in Cleveland against this defense.
Well, especially, Cleveland home road split on defense was wild last year.
Massive, yeah.
And all that. Isaac gave us a super chat and 2 super chats. So first one segues into this. Thoughts on the Browns and Broncos backfield here. And thank you, Isaac. Appreciate you.
Yep.
Browns, let's talk a little bit about the Browns backfield. Nick Chubb starting the year on the PUP list means he's missing the first 4 games. A lot of positive buzz on Jerome Ford. But yet, if you go to like where he's being drafted, it's very reasonable. You're not having to pay a whole lot for Jerome Ford. I do have some Jerome Ford. In fact, I got him in the NFFC primetime. I got him at the back end of the 9th round. I think I would have gotten him in the 10th or 11th round earlier, but because we know the definition on Chubb, we go a little bit more there. But it did cost me Blake Corum. I kind of wanted both, and I wonder if I would, the team that I was going, it was on the back end of the 9th round. Team that was at the end took Corum. Had I gone Corum, maybe Ford would not have made it back to me. I'm not quite sure, but I like Ford a lot. Just a question of, I think a little question of durability and what happens after Chubb comes back. But keep in mind, Chubb is missing a minimum of 4 games. It's not guaranteed that it's going to be Chubb coming back once we go into, and he's going to take over in week 5. We don't know that for sure.
No, I completely agree with you. I have almost no Nick Chubb. I have a decent amount of Jerome Ford, not as much as I would like. He actually would have been a good player to list earlier in the pod of our FOMO guys, but I was able to get him in 2 leagues in the past week. And I don't look at this as a 4-game rental of Jerome Ford. I think it, like you said, for all we know, Nick Chubb, maybe he's not back till week 6, week 7. This is a very, very, very serious injury that he's coming back from. And I also don't think, even when Nick Chubb is back up to speed, we'll say, week 8, maybe he's fully up to speed. He's back 100% physically. He's not going to be carrying the ball 19 times a game. Like, I still think this is a 2-back system. I think Jerome Ford proved enough last year after the injury to Chubb that he still deserves work in this backfield. And you're getting, in my mind, a 4 or 5 game window where he is the very clear number 1 back. And he has some pretty good matchups in that span. I mean, despite being in a tough division, the Browns don't have all that difficult of a schedule. It does pick up late. They finish with Kansas City, Cincinnati, Miami, and Baltimore, but we're a little bit less concerned about those, for fantasy purposes. I mean, you have Jerome Ford for the Dallas game at Jacksonville, not a good defense. against the Giants and then the Las Vegas Raiders. I mean, those are your 4 games where Jerome Ford is your definitive starter. And part of the reason that I like him so much is I'm down on Deshaun Watson. I think they're going to have to lean on Jerome Ford more than maybe they would like, because I don't think this is going to, snap back to being this, overly effective air raid passing game that Deshaun Watson, piloted with the Houston Texans. I think that version of Deshaun Watson is gone. There's a reason that they have to lean so heavily on that ground game. So I like Jerome Ford a lot. And like you said, the price has not ballooned, I don't think, to the point that it should at this point. I guess the one concern you might have is that they do have some injuries on the offensive line, but Cleveland's always been one of those teams like Green Bay that seems to be able to plug and play pretty well as far as, pulling guys up from, either off the street or, late round picks that can kind of sync up with that offensive line and they don't have a massive drop off.
Yeah. I mean, I'm hesitant to totally doubt Nick Chubb. I love Nick Chubb. I really hope he does recover well, but I think it'll be a slow introduction. I think by like week 10, then you might, somewhere midpoint of the season, that might transition over, but I think Ford's going to be very useful for us early on.
Right.
Other part of the super chat question, and thank you, Isaac, for this, is about the Broncos. The Broncos backfield there. Samaje Perine finally got cut, all after, a preseason speculation, rumor mill, it came to fruition. Javonte Williams is a starter. Jaleel McLaughlin has gotten a lot more helium, and they still have the rookie Estime as well.
Javonte Williams is the one that I want here. And you're going to have to start to pay up, right? I mean, he was a guy that you would often see go in like the 80s or the 90s not that long ago. And, in the SiriusXM host draft that I did the other day, he went in the middle of the 6th round. He went right immediately after James Conner, David Montgomery, and Ramondre Stevenson. Then it was Javonte Williams. He went before Aaron Jones. He went before Tony Pollard, before Zamir White, Najee Harris, etc. I'm not saying that's going to be the new cost for him in every league, but I think people are starting to come around on Javonte Williams. I actually think there's a weird parallel with like Javonte Williams is like the Diontae Johnson of running backs, if that makes sense. Where
yes,
like,
I love that.
Nobody's excited about it. Nobody likes the team, but then you're like, well, I mean, the opportunity is there. Like Javonte Williams is pretty good, even if this team's not all that good. I think it's appropriate where he's going, right? Like I like him over someone like Tony Pollard, who we have no idea, what the workload is going to look like. They're saying it'll be 50-50. They're going to ride the hot hand. We'll see. I think Javonte Williams versus Zamir White is an interesting debate. I just like the player Javonte Williams more than I do Zamir White, and I think there's a little bit more potential, with that Denver offense compared to Vegas, where I'm staying away essentially at all costs. You mentioned Samaje Perine, by the way. He's somebody that I started to grab, later in drafts, and you have to be aggressive, right? Especially if you're in a league with a few sharps, people are going to be snapping up players like Samaje Perine. This was like the day after he signed with Kansas City. The Chiefs just put CEH on, the reserve NFI list earlier today, like an hour ago. So
and it's a PST thing too. PTSD, excuse me.
Correct.
And so this could last a really long time.
Well, he's out. He's out at least the first 4 games. So right. We know that for sure. And yeah, it could be well beyond that. But Samaje Perine is now the RB2 without question.
Yeah, and he could be, as Angelo says, Carson Steele could be part of this picture as well.
Yeah, I think he will. I think they build in some, like, this is just such a classic Chiefs guy, right? Carson Steele. Like, they'll build in some Carson Steele plays, like they just because they're the Chiefs and they have that leeway and they like to do fun stuff like that. I think if we're talking fantasy, like, who do you want in a PPR league? I want Samaje Perine over Carson Steele, no question.
Right. Isaac sent a second super chat. So we're going to, not super chunk, that's a band, super chat. And we appreciate that. He goes, is it crazy to think Ken Walker is a top 10 running back? This is a guy I don't have any of. Right. I have 0 Kenneth Walker, and it's not quite a fade, but it's also not really a FOMO either. Some of it's what I'm drafting. He goes in the 5th round almost every draft. This is where I'm looking to take usually a 3rd or 4th receiver or a tight end. This is where I'm starting to shop at, that, because I'm getting, in the drafts where I've been going anchor running back, I've gotten my 1 running back at this point in time. I'm not ready to start shopping for my second one, but it's not crazy that he's a top 10 running back at all. I think we're going to be learning how Seattle runs their offense this year. We got a new head coach. It seems like it's a faster paced offense, which doesn't always mean it's great for the running back. May mean that they throw the ball more often too. And I just think Zach Charbonnet is a really good backup. And and combined with that, with Walker's injury history, makes me a little concerned, which is why I guess I've been steering away from him. That said, Charbonnet is the one that was banged up in training camp, not Walker.
Yeah, still maintain that the split between those two is larger than it should be in terms of the ADPs. I mean, Kenneth Walker's going like 90 picks ahead of Zach Charbonnet. So I think Walker should maybe be going a little bit later, and Charbonnet should probably be going higher. I think that could actually be a true two-back system. But a lot of the whispers out of Seattle have been that, Kenneth Walker looks fantastic. He's the home run hitter. He's the guy that they kind of are going to lean on more, especially early on. So it makes sense. To answer the question, though, could he be a top 10 running back? Yeah, I think he could, right? I mean, you look at last season in PPR through the first 10 weeks of the season, Kenneth Walker was your RB7. And that included, a bye week. We're talking total production here. That included a bye week, and it included 2 weeks where he scored 10 combined points, back-to-back, stinkers in week 8 and week 9. So, the template is there. Even if you think Zach Charbonnet, like I do, is going to have a larger role this season, there's absolutely a path to Kenneth Walker being a top 10 running back. We're not asking top 5, right? It's like, could he supplant Rachaad White, Kyron Williams, and, let's say one of Barkley, Etienne, Henry, or Achane get hurt? Yeah, I mean, he could. I think Kenneth Walker is the RB15 right now. We're not asking somebody to go from the RB30 to the RB10. That's totally attainable.
Yeah, I think so too. I've been getting a lot of Charbonnet, by the way. So I guess I've been getting more Charbonnet and less Walker, but I see how it could really work with Walker too. I mean, they're similar draft capital. That's the funny thing. Both were relatively early running back draft picks.
Yeah, both second rounders.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm a little surprised they have both, for that matter. I guess it's just spotting talent, but it's also a different regime too. It's not Pete Carroll anymore too. So that there's a whole lot of interesting things there. All right. Before we sign off here, any other week 1 thoughts? Any other post-draft, post-mortem here? Any other thoughts before we sign off?
Nothing too much, man. I feel like we've covered it. I certainly would direct everybody to check out our YouTube page where we have a ton of videos. I feel like I've done a video about every single top 100 player at this point. So if you got a last minute draft coming up tonight, go check all that out. You could hear us tonight as well as for the rest of the season over on SiriusXM Fantasy, 7 to 9 p.m. my time, 5 to 7 p.m. Pacific time. Check that out. We don't take national holidays off, Jeff. We got to talk football tonight. It is our obligation. The one thing I will leave you with here is a good note from Ben Fox, who does good job covering basically the NFL gambling world. The most lopsided week 1 side at the DraftKings Sportsbook, again, according to Ben Fox, the Houston Texans to cover against Indianapolis. We talked about that game. 91% of the money is on the Texans minus 2.5. Very interesting.
Interesting, because I'm on the Colts. So, or for what it's worth.
There we are.
That was one I kind of like. I went through my early exercise of figuring out the line, guessing the lines, and I had as a pick 'em. I had, I figured 2.5, giving 2.5 extra to the, take away the home field advantage, make it a pick 'em game. It was enough to the Texans because I think the Colts are good. So we'll see. A lot of it is Anthony Richardson. What can he do? He was balling out against the Texans in that game, by the way.
He was.
Remember. So anyways, I'm signing off with that note, but lots of more to come. Like you said, we're going to be on the SiriusXM show tonight. So check us out there. And catch us every Monday as we'll start recapping the week. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Great job in the live stream today. Lots of good comments there. Lots of good chatter. Appreciate you all for that. If you're listening to us on podcast, we thank you for that. We invite you to like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get it, whether you're streaming here on or if you're picking up on the podcast form. And also check out RotoWire, rotowire.com/pod. I'll have my value meters rankings up usually on Tuesday nights, but this week I'll have it up today. So check that out as well, rotowire.com/pod. Thanks for listening. Take care.